Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to meet you again in the second session. In this session, we have 4 speakers, one from Korea and the other 3 from Europe. In terms of region for research, 2 papers are on Poland, while the other 2 are on Romania. Concerning the topics, very interesting and various topics in politics, economy, migration, and language are covered. Through this session, I'm sure that we will learn what changes have occurred in Poland and Romania over the past 30 years, and what are the achievements, limitations, and lessons of those changes. Each presenter will have about 20 minutes for their presentation. And after finishing all presentations, we will also have time for questions, answer, and discussion all together. First of all, let me introduce Dr. Tomasz Wierzbowski, who is the director of Euro Access International Relations. Dr. Tomasz Wierzbowski, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear very well. Thank you for this introduction.
Okay. The topic of his presentation is listening to the wind of change in Poland 30 years after transition. The title sounds very poetic, isn't it? So please welcome Dr. Wierzbowski.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction. The topic sounds, yes, very poetic, but I think it's not that romantic, but we shall see. So when I was preparing for this conference, I didn't know where to start because transformations, transitions are not events. These are processes, and it's very hard to identify where the process starts, where it ends. And I will repeat this many times today because I will be talking about processes, various processes with different layers, with different dimensions. But actually, where I started is I started in Korea, because when I came to Korea, I think my slides are not changing. Can you help me with logistics? You should see the different slide. Korea's fate. Can you see my slide, Korea fate? Okay.
Yes,
now.
We can see your slide.
Yes. So when I came to Korea, I was always wondering while studying Korean history, why Soviet troops stopped at 38th parallel when they invaded Korean Peninsula. Why they did not advance to Busan, and why they did not occupy the whole peninsula. And I had this question in mind all the time. And actually, when I was preparing for this presentation, I realized that Korea's fate, together with Poland's fate, I just changed the slide. I see there's a huge delay. Korea's fate and Poland's fate were actually on the same table in international conferences in Potsdam, Yalta. And my understanding is that Stalin wanted to gain credibility in the eyes of Churchill and Roosevelt and Truman. He wanted to show that he's a gentleman, that he will respect the gentleman's agreement in Europe because he cared about Europe, and he didn't care that much about Korea. Korea was back then underdeveloped, and everything was at stake here in Europe, in Berlin, in Warsaw. So my understanding is that he stopped his troops on 38 parallel to gain credibility, to gain respect, and so that the promises that were made on those conferences were actually kept. And this is where Polish fate started. Churchill later on said that from Szczecin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. And we can see it as a symbolic start of the socialist government or communist government in Poland. But again, I don't see it as an event. I don't see it as a starting point. We just need symbols. We need symbols to value them. We need symbols to worship them. So we put this symbolic meaning to some events. At the same time, a couple of decades later, Polish actress Joanna Szczepkowska spontaneously announced on the Polish national television and in the main news She announced that on June 4th of June 1989, communism in Poland ended. And once again, it was nice, romantic, poetic announcement, but I don't see it that way. It was the process that started long time ago, and it's really difficult to identify the starting point of this process of transition or transformation, because again, if we think of transformation as of an event, it never happened. But if we think of it as a process, it had started long time ago. There's a huge delay when I'm changing slides. So anyhow, at the end of the Second World War, before Soviet Union entered to Poland, a Polish independent movement, Polish Home Army, was trying to secure the capital Warsaw by organizing Warsaw Uprising. And at the same time, in different areas of Poland, there was Operation Tempest, conducted by the Polish Home Army before the Soviet entered Polish territory. So both of those, I just selected a couple of them because there were many. Both of those processes clearly showed that Poland was trying to self-determine its own fate when it comes to national state building process. But at the same time, exactly at the same time, Polish communists announced in Lublin so-called Polish Committee of National Liberation. It was the starting point of the Polish communist government. Obviously, it was created in Moscow, not in Lublin, and they started to gain power. The difference was that the Polish Home Army was only symbolically supported by the government in exile in London, whereas the Polish communists were heavily supported by Moscow, by Stalin, by Soviet communists. And we have to remember that there were Poles, there were Polish state persons, there were Polish politicians who were truly ideologically communists. One of them, Wanda Wasilewska, actually wanted Poland not to be independent state, but to be one of the Soviet Republic. And those people were there. We have to remember about them. But at the same time, we have to remember about so-called doomed soldiers, or more precisely, cursed soldiers, as we call them in Poland, people who never stopped fighting for independence, people who were performing combat operations even in 50s, and the last of them was actually killed in 1963. They never stopped, they never gave up, they never actually surrendered to the Polish communist government. They were fighting for independence constantly after the war for more than a decade. But nevertheless, Poland fell under Soviet control. Between 45 and 56, it was heavily infiltrated by Soviets. Some of them were even members of the Polish cabinet. And yes, Poland was not sovereign state when it comes to the domestic policy or foreign policy. It had to follow directions and guidelines from Moscow. But Polish people never lost faith, never stopped. And the biggest no to the communist government actually was in Poznan in June 56, when after some changes in the labor law, people massively went on the street and opposed communist government, demanding bread, demanding better working conditions, demanding lowering taxes. Prime Minister back then, Cyrankiewicz, said that any provocateur or lunatic who raises his hand against the people's government may be sure that this hand will be chopped off. So the response was very, very severe. Almost 60 people died in the couple of days. Tanks were on the street, but Poles said no to the communist government. In the same way, they said no in December 1970 in Gdańsk, when prices went up and there was a food shortages. Demonstrations broke out, and people once again massively went on streets. Once again, the government used soldiers, heavily equipped soldiers, tanks, to pacify this demonstration. And then we obviously know the processes of late 70s and early 80s Poland back then. had no money. Actually, the Polish government, they borrowed money from international community massively. They couldn't borrow more because the debt was so huge. So once again, the economic situation was dire. And there's the famous Wałęsa, who together with others, not alone, together with others, he founded Solidarity movement, Solidarność, and this solidarity was actually not only a labor union, it was a social movement, massive social movement for different social groups, laborers, but also students, other people. It was big no to the Polish United Workers' Party. It was an anti-communist movement that gained support, and obviously in December 81, back then General Jaruzelski proclaimed martial law for the next 3 years. This is a little bit of history, and from mid-80s, Solidarity gained a lot of power, a lot of support, and at the late 80s, Solidarity, together with communist government, they sat together in so-called roundtable talks. Roundtable, everyone is equal in roundtable. There are no better and worse seats, and they discuss concessions, and they discuss what to do and how to continue. We know all of that. June 4th, the first partly democratic elections in Poland, although almost majority of seats were secured for the communists or post-communists nowadays, but they failed to form governments 2 times. President Jaruzelski back then asked Solidarity activist Tadeusz Mazowiecki to form a government, which he did successfully. And for the first time, after 40 years, Poland had a government led by non-communists. And there's this famous saying from Poland, yours president, but our prime minister back then. Okay, it was beginning of 1990s. In December 1990, President Lech Wałęsa is elected as the first democratically elected president after decades, and he starts to put some reforms. He starts to change the economy from central state governed economy to liberal economy. The early 90s, the first presidency of President Wałęsa is actually the consolidation of democratic institutions. Then back in 95, President Kwaśniewski is elected. This is interesting because he used to be a member of the Polish United Workers' Party. He used to be so-called communist. He used to be a cabinet member, and still he was democratically elected as the president 2 times. 2 terms are allowed in Poland, and he was elected 2 times as a president. And this is very interesting because between 95 and 2005, Poland joined NATO, Poland joined European Union, and this only consolidated democracy in Poland because Poland became a part of international democratic liberal order. Poland became a credible member of the European Union, and it was all done by so-called post-communists. So we can see that political system changed, but leadership not. And it's interesting that people who were back then in communist cabinet now, while democratically elected, they improve democratic mechanisms. And later, modern history, right-wing government was elected after President Kwaśniewski and his team, and until today is more or less back and forth. It's a typical political process that is happening in different countries as well. Now that was the description. That was description what happened. It was a history lesson. Now the question remains: why? Why the regime changed? Why there was transformation? Why the authoritarian regime was changed, or people changed it into democracy? So obviously, as I mentioned, processes. It's so hard in the real world to delineate a linear relationship between cause and effect, to actually prove that X causes Y. But in the morning session, somebody mentioned that Poland was unique and is unique. Well, maybe yes, maybe not. But in this regard, in regard to transformation and regime change, Poland was not unique at all, because we can see that over years, the number of authoritarian regimes dropped and the number of democracies increased, actually. It's a systematic trend. It happened across time and space. Nowadays, we have more democracies than authoritarian regimes. And why? So I was studying this topic from different dimensions with different paradigms. I looked into political dimensions, social dimensions of it, socioeconomic dimensions. The study is massive about it. It was hugely researched over last decades. And people were looking into different aspects of it, whether it's our culture, whether it's economic development, maybe level of education. Different scholars put focus on different aspects of the social phenomenon of political change, and they were able to identify a couple of so-called reasons of democracy or causes of democracy, what can lead to democratization of democratic processes. And one of them is economic development. It's very straightforward that, the more money people have, the more freedom they pursue. Other claims claim that it's a cultural value, that certain culture are for democracies and certain not. And they point at some Muslim countries, that Muslim countries cannot be democratic because it's not in their culture. Others say it's the dictatorship type, that party-based authoritarian regime can change faster than, for example, a personal cult authoritarian regime. And others say that it's interstate trade, the engagement in international system. The more countries trade with each other, the more credible they want, and the more democratic values they put into it. Some claim that it's a level of education. The smarter we are, the more we learn, the more we see, the more freedom we pursue, and the more democratic we want our state to be. And of course, there's social mobilization. If we share information, we do something collective actions, right? So I focused on one of them, economic development, having in mind that it's an interchangeable process with different layers. And even while thinking only one of them, economic development, I keep in mind endogeneity, for example, that economic development can lead to democracy, but at the same time, democracy must be a necessary condition for economic development, because central state economy, for example, has its own limitation and cannot grow like liberal economy can. So I took economic development, and as you can see, I created two subsets of cases. On the left, I put countries from Albania, Romania, from Central East Europe, which is Albania, Romania, and Poland. On the right hand, I put Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. And what they have in common, they both subsets, all those 6 countries, were some kind of authoritarian regime at some point of time. Maybe different kind, maybe party personal authoritarian, here personalist authoritarian, but all of them were authoritarian regime, and all of them experienced some kind of regime change, transformation in case of Poland and Albania, revolution in case of Romania, but all of them changed their political systems while being totally different. So this method, it's a qualitative comparative method to delineate possible causal relationship. This method is called John Stuart Mill's method of similarity or agreement. Later on developed, it's called most different system design, to compare totally different cases, totally different, with the same outcome, with the same dependent variable, but very, very different independent variables. For example, Albania was an atheist society, whereas obviously these African countries were Muslims. And I X-rayed them, all of them. I was trying to identify all those possible independent variables that may have caused dependent variable. So maybe leader's death led to a transformation, maybe. So I put all of them to possibly find some common ground, some similarities And I did. I found economic growth, some kind of economic growth, limited economic growth or rapid economic growth. But I found this economic growth to support the theory that economic development can lead to democratization. Because once again, it's very straightforward and simple. The more money people have, the more freedom they pursue. So I took this economic development to one of my subsets, to Central East Europe, to Albania, Poland, and Romania. I need to wait until the slides is changed. The lag is just terrible. So anyway, I operationalized economic development in Albania, Poland, and Romania with GDP per capita. It's a pretty simple indicator, but for the lack of better ones, it's kind of informative. And yes, Poland in 50s were economically less developed than in 80s. And there were some points in time when the economic development was disrupted, and there was even decrease in GDP per capita. And actually, this happened during or before the events I described before in the slides. Poznan 56, Gdańsk 70. People went on the street when they had less money until certain period of growth. And while studying it, I realized it is called J-curve theory, which says that the possibility of political change or more aggressively of revolution increases in state engulfed by the economic stagnation following a period of fair development. So there must be certain development, and when there's stagnation, people go on the street and oppose the situation. So again, I'm not saying that this explains fully why Poland changed from one regime to another, but at least it helps us to maybe to understand a bit, and maybe even to predict. I'm thinking about North Korea right now, why there is no economic development in North Korea, or why there is a very limited development in North Korea. Maybe it has something with regime stability and regime transition feasibility, maybe. So where is Poland now? What are democratic institutions, rules of law, human rights? I mean, these are current issues discussed widely. Well, frankly speaking, the current government that was elected 2 times in a very short span of time transformed state television networks into government propaganda. There are issues with countries' court system, with constitutional tribunal. The independence of the electoral commission is questioned this weekend. There are some issues with freedom of speech. I mean, Wałęsa and 14 other senior statesmen, including Kwaśniewski, including foreign ministers, they said that the Supreme Court reform will eventually establish the tripartite division of power model, and the model that is this essence of the democratic rule of law. And from the international perspective, EU Commission has problems with Poland right now, 3 decades after transformation. They keep pointing at the rules of law, whether it's how it's performing. There's problem with women rights and abortion. EU has problem with LGBT-free zones, so-called in Poland. And I'm changing slides, but it takes some time. So yes, only a couple of weeks ago, there were massive protests in Poland against the current very strict abortion law. And yeah, it's interesting to see, political change and transition. And in the middle of Cold War, when Poland was a communist country, but still with Catholic Church, women from Sweden were traveling to Poland to to perform abortion. And where are we now after a couple of decades? It's totally the other way around. So yes, Poland fought for this, peacefully fought for this democracy after Second World War for decades. And now 30 years after transformation, 31 years after transformation, some of these democratic institutions are questioned. I'm not suggesting anything here with this slide, but yes, people are on the streets again. And only yesterday, one civil group announced that they are organizing protests on December 16th, and that this will be the biggest protest in history, in Polish history. So yeah, there is that. So I was asking myself, how come democratically elected government is dismantling democratic institutions and it's still re-elected? Basically, half of the people on the right-hand picture, less than half of them, voted for the government that they are protesting against right now. So I was thinking, how come, elected government is dismantling democratic institutions and still has this support? And here I came up with Professor In Ji Hyun's concept, working hypothesis of mass dictatorship. Professor In Ji Hyun was comparing pre-modern despotism with modern dictatorship and its relation to mass support and to society. And he found up this bottom-up dictatorship, that it's actually possible that some sort of dictatorship has a massive support because a government or dictatorship can manipulate masses to have this support. And to add on that, my personal opinion, I just think that Poles were not exposed long enough to genuine democratic values to understand them, to embrace them, to comprehend them and to appreciate them. That's just, Poland has never been a modern democracy except this 90s and 2000s, this 20 years, which is not long enough to maybe to appreciate democracy and to fully understand it. That's my opinion. So where are we? Where are we 31 years after transformation?
Dr. Wierzbowski?
Yes.
Are you almost close to the
I'm on my
end?
last. Yes, I'm on my last slide right now.
Yeah, we are running over time, so please finish it. Yeah.
Yep. Just waiting for the slides to change. Well, the Economic Intelligence Unit, which is a think tank that conducts research on democracy, called Poland fluid democracy or fake democracy. I also saw a term totalitarian democracy and also illiberal democracy. I will not go into it. I don't want to take time. I'm happy to continue in Q&A. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, insightful presentation. Thank you very much. Dr. Wierzbowski?
Yes?
Yeah, there will be a question for you, so please be with us, okay?
Of course.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, let us move to the second presentation. Dr. Mstislav Sprengel. Dr. Sprengel?
I am.
Hi, how are you?
Yes, good, thank you. I'm okay.
Yeah, let me introduce briefly, then you can take your presentation, okay? Dr. Sprengel is an associate professor of the Faculty of Law and Administration of Adam Mickiewicz University of Poland. He will present economic migration of Poles and their situation in an era of change. Yeah, thank you so much. You can start.
Okay.
Yeah, you will have around 15 and 20 minutes for your presentation, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good day, everyone. My topic, my presentation is economic migration of Poles and the situation in the era of change. And I have to move to the second page. In the history of the fate of Poles, migration of Poles have been an important element. Therefore, readopting this subject in this age of Polish membership of the European Union specifically entitles us to take up this subject. The main objective of the study is to determine the scale of migration of Poles since belonging to the European Union and to indicate the main repercussions associated with the phenomenon. Different general reasons are distinguished from the point of view of the causes of migration. Among other things, they can be family, professional, educational, political, religious, national, and economic. Although listed as economic at the end, it is very important in the lives of Poles and often occur as one of the main reasons for moving and looking for better wage conditions and raising the standard of living. However, due to the way in which migration is organized and conducted, it may take place in groups or individually, planned or spontaneous, legally or illegally, voluntarily or forcibly. It can be pointed out that all these forms have occurred in the case of Polish society. And now, reason for migration. The neo-classical approach is that workers migrate to places where there is the higher wage. Migration means as much as force to compensate for the disparity of the wage rates. The Keynesian study also called for the migration issue to be linked to the unemployment rate. A new neoclassical concept, on the other hand, was to abandon the analysis of mobility in the context of economic equilibrium and to treat migration as a method of allocation resources. Migration is an investment that increases the productivity of human resources. For Stiastal, a lecturer of economic sciences at the University of Chicago, the essence is therefore for identification of private and social financial cost associated with the relocation and the non-monetary mental cost associated with the change of environment. On the other hand, monetary migration income is the sum of positive or negative increments to the stream of the real revenue resulting from the moving to another location. This increase may be the result of a change in nominal revenue, a change in employment cost, a changing in prices, or a combination of them. When deciding whether to live, those planning to live take into account all for and against going abroad. Often people will emigrate if the expected usefulness of living of countries is greater than staying in it. In the literature of the subject, there are many factors of influence the decision to live. They are divided in the micro and macro socioeconomic situation. These determinants are presented in the form of a push and pull model. Push factors from the country of origin and attracting to the country of destination. Push out incentives include the labor market situation, high unemployment, low wages or intensivist, high taxes, especially of the wealth in the country of residence. The main attraction factor is the possibility of immediately taking up work and receiving a high salary. In conclusion of this part, my speech, it can be concluded that a person will be more ready to go abroad if the benefits of living will be greater than the benefits of staying in the current place of residence. The period of reaping the benefits will be relating long, not marriage or partner, is childless, is open to experience and has also already been abroad. The economic situation in the country is bad. The next factor is the situation of the labor market in Poland. It seems that the main rationale influencing the migration of Poles is usually the situation on the labor market in Poland and in the host countries. Although the situation on the Polish market has improved significantly in recent years, in previous decades of the pure condition of the labor market in Poland was the main motive of the departure of Poles from the country. For example, compared to the 2013, unemployment fell by 7.7%. And another factors and interesting point is where the Poles migrate. Potential immigrants can seek work to the European Union after Poland's accession to the European Union, to opening up the labor market in the UK and Ireland has resulted in a huge influx of Poles into these countries. Before Poland joined the European Union, we going to Germany, Italy, as well as France and Spain were the most popular countries. Some chose a different continent as their target for emigration and took up paid work in the United States. And also we have another place. From the day and Poles began to come to Dublin and Cork and Massive, the average worker salary is 11 points per hour and so on. And I'm going now to general conclusion. In conclusion, at the beginning of the 21st century, when most of the world's economic migrants came from overcrowded countries in Asia, the Middle East, and South America, Eastern Europe, migrants were one of the last major groups of European origin. It is unique that in the last 150 years, a region experiences by rapid and radical changes with two world wars where national borders political systems, labor migrants have changed several times, are one of the few life strategies that make up this continuity of these societies. Poles left the country almost for the same reason as they used to, that is because of the desire to raise the standard of living. In recent decades, because of the ambition of aspiration, they have occupied important positions in Western organizations. Poles are resourceful and hardworking, thanks to which Poles are doing well. Nevertheless, it can still be seen the earnings in the host countries of Poles, in many cases, are lower than those of the citizens. At the same time, many people work below their qualification. The money in serves to support families staying in Poland. Thank you very much for your attention. I think I'm already on time. Thank you very much.
Actually, the presentation topic is very interesting. So I will make a question maybe later on. So please be with us. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
yeah, we have a time pressure, so let us move to the next presenter. Now I would like to introduce the third presenter, who is Dr. Matei Geboianu. Dr. Geboianu is an associate professor of the Department of History of Bucharest University. His title of his presentation is Romania after the revolution, the beginning of the transition. His presentation is pre-recorded, so we will listen first.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Matei Geboianu. I am assistant professor of Faculty of History, University of Bucharest. And in the next minutes, I will present you my paper regarding Romania after the revolution, the beginning of the transition. The main topics of my presentation will be the end of the Ceausescu era, the political and the economic changes after 1989. So let's begin. The end of 1989 brought major changes in the Romanian society, starting from a command economy towards a consumerist society and a market economy. The effervescence of the produced in the communists, of the effervescence of the changes produced in the communist bloc also included Romania, where at the end of 1989, Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena were still trying to maintain a dictatorial regime based on a cult of personality and citizen surveillance carried out by the Securitate. Since 1980, the economic and political situation of Romania had been continuously deteriorating. After deciding to stop international loans and repay the outstanding one, Romanians were subject to more and more restrictions, with basic food and fuel being rationed out, while electricity and heat were only available during certain time intervals. The planned economy began to show its weaknesses. For example, in agriculture, the production of several crops decreased by almost 50%, and the livestock were reduced due to the lack of food. From a political point of view, Nicolae Ceausescu managed to avoid the formation of an opposition amongst members of the Romanian Communist Party. He managed to eliminate all his opponents one by one. The more frequent use of the Securitate led to the creation of a police state in which everything was reported and nobody in a community knew who was an informant or not. At that time, with the exception of some personalities, there were hardly any attempts in the Romanian society or the Romanian Communist Party to create an alternative. After the revolution, starting with December 1989, marked the establishment of the first parties, which the most important were those with a historical tradition. The National Liberal Party and Christian Democratic National Peasants Party. An important moment in the evolution of the Romanian politics soon after the revolution was represented by the decision of the National Salvation Front, the body that took the control in Romania starting with December 1989, to transform itself into a political party and participate in the May 20 elections. This decision was followed by large protests organized by opposition parties. To appear more open and inclusive, the new power agreed with the establishment of a new body, the Provisional Council of the National Union, that held the role of a provisional governing body until the election that took place in May. These institutions also meant the victory of Ion Iliescu was similar to his vision of national consensus, a term that was often used by the president-elect on May in the first years that followed. The election of May 20 represented an overwhelming victory from Ion Iliescu, who won from the first round with a percentage of 86.19%. Although the historical parties also participated in the elections, this had no voice in the political scenes due to the monopolization of the official discourses by the power installed in December 1989, but also due to the weak organization, which led to their fragmentation in several smaller parties. In the spring of 1990, the socio-political environment was marked by a surge in protest, with the most important one taking place in the Piața University Square and giving rise to a phenomenon with the same name, University Square phenomenon. Organized by the civil society, the protest attracted hundreds of young people from Bucharest and from all over the country. In the line with the Article 8 of the Timișoara Proclamation, they demanded the exclusion from public office of those who had been part of communist nomenclature and the Securitate. After the elections, the protests lost their intensity, with only a few people remaining in the square. However, public order institutions were fast to react against it. Miners from the Jiu Valley came to liberate the square with the so-called goal of planting flowers. The whole world was able to watch the images with the violent actions of the miners against the young people in the square and the students who, in the opinion of the aggressors, had a non-conformist look, as well as their action of destroying the headquarters of historical political parties and several newsrooms such as România Liberă, Free Romania. These images were followed by the discourse of President Ion Iliescu, who thanked the miners for their action against the fascist elements. These events triggered a wave of criticism on an international level and did a real disservice to Romanians' image. The attempt to annihilate the political opposition is a key element in understanding the 1990 parliament, just as for Ion Iliescu, the detached support of the army and the Securitate is essentially to explain why, realistically, there could be no successor from the crown or from the crowd, or from dissidents of the helm of the Romanian state. The political life was dominated by Ion Iliescu, and the National Salvation Front, with a power struggle between Prime Minister Petre Roman and the President of the Romanian becoming more apparent since late 1990. The economic measures promoted by the Romanian government led to a series of social protests, culminated with a new mineriadă on September 1991, and resulting in the dismissal of the government announced by the President of the Romanian Senate, Alexandru Bârlădean. After a dramatic loss in the 1990s, the opposition managed to regroup and form in 1991 the Romanian Democratic Convention, comprising some parties, some important opposition parties from Romania. The political life became an amalgam, a mixture of neo-communists who wanted to appear before the public as promoters of moderate democracy, and anti-communists who supported a much more radical development of the society, which could allow for a more rapid implementation of the Western model. The country's leadership position were generally not seen as having a function role, but rather they were considered a reward, and those who had never held a public office felt even more entitled to have one. So belonging to a political party began to represent an opportunity in terms of employment. The trend set by the Communist Party was never abandoned. Instead, it was presented as a process where specialists and experts were appointed to leadership positions, provided they were party members. Alina Mungiu, a well-known Romanian political scientist, point out that belonging to the political gang, clique, and not one's qualification is the best indicator to determine if someone can occupy a position in Romania. We can therefore see the connection between certain political clique from the communist period or from after the revolution and their important role to the political scene. The lack of economic results coupled with political scandals had a negative impact upon the society trust in politicians and the institutions controlled by them, parliament, government, presidency. From an economic point of view, Romanian evolutions was not as favorable as the economic evolutions of other states which were in the same situation in December 1989. The transition of the Romanian economy from a centralized form, which meant strictly planning and government control, towards a market economy was conditioned by characteristics of the communist economy, the political actors of the new rulers, and the low interest of Western investors. In December 1989, the Romanian economy was facing a tumultuous past and a hardly promising future. After more than 4 decades of forced industrialization, the competitiveness of the economy was at its lowest level in the Communist League. The lack of balance between different industry sectors and the penury were coming more evident, and the suffering of the people was unimaginable. Romania was far behind its neighboring countries in terms of necessary institutional framework for the post-communist transition. The psychological disposition of the population from dramatic changes and the social basis to implement a market economy. In addition, the shock therapy of the 1980s instilled in people the hope of an immediate and substantial change of their living conditions after the change of the regime, which led to a high degree of intolerance toward those new austerity measures. In this phase, the inherent structure was dismantled, which led to a considerable increase of conflict in the system and consuming resources, consuming of energy resources important to achieving the transformation. One of the aspects that requires our increased attention is the fact that political factors enable the economic decline, both by omission and by intention. By intention because they succumbed the mass pressure and were influenced by the prospect of May elections. They were followed by an increase in salaries and the establishment of 5-day work week, despite a decrease in the economic productions, while trying to control prices and an overvalued exchange rate. By omitting because there were no real attempts to address macroeconomic imbalance before November 1990. In the 1990 election campaign, National Salvation Front suggested that if anything was to be shared, and by this meaning privatization, then the National Salvation Front was the party of those who argued that everyone should be given a part. The country missed the start of economic reform as the ideological struggle between the two wings of the National Salvation Front became more apparent. The group supported by the Prime Minister Petre Roman promoted the idea of an accelerated economic reform with a focus on the liberalization of prices, whereas the supporting Ion Iliescu wanted to impose a policy of timing the reforms to avoid putting pressure on the population. Private sectors in Romania develop in an environment marked by confusing economic policies pursued by the state and the absence of regulations to ensure a coherent development. The sui generis entrepreneurs took advantage of the new free market of consumer products, which offered them the possibility to conduct their business in an open manner and expand their economic activities. The new situation was so natural that the free will of every person had become a certain certainty without limits. They were operating in a market with no regulations, and if there were any regulation, no one was taking them into account. The dissolution of the communist state led to a fierce struggle for a takeover of the state's patrimony, especially the patrimony of the party. The struggle is described by Silviu Bucanu as part of the wild capitalism, a stage in which a prey economy was born along with the primitive accumulation of capital and the formation of new economic and political elites with many members from party activists group or the Securitate. Another problem of the Romanian economy was the lack of foreign investment, which can explain by the lack of political measures meant to attract capital. The policy promoted by the National Salvation Front and expressed in the 90s election campaign had a well-determined trajectory ruled by the slogan, "We do not sell our country." The latter was directed against Ion Rațiu, his opponent in the 1990 elections, the opponent of Ion Iliescu, and his program of openness to the West. In the first years after the revolution, Romania went throughout the transition from communist to democracy. The transformation targeted all levels of society, from political to economic. At the point on the political level, during this period, we cannot talk about the emergence of a visionary political class with a vision for Romania, which could propose and support the necessary measures from Romania's transformation. A reason from this was the non-existence of a dissident political elite which could have been the basis for a renewal of the political class. The historical parties could not promote themselves enough to be known by the big mass of the population, while the National Salvation Front, the heir party of the Romanian Communist Party, managed to win the election of 1990 and 1992, an unprecedented event in other communist countries such as Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, where the opposition parties had managed to impose themselves. From an economic point of view, the delay in implementation viable reform, which could have reduced the losses caused by the Romanian economy, led to high inflation rates and unemployment becoming a real treatment to every worker. A hard struggle began in the process of taking over the patrimony of the states and the one owned by the party, an action often disguised as a privatization process carried out with the knowledge and protection of politicians. Foreign investments were at a low level due to the lack of economic and fiscal measures and the lack of trust in the Romanian justice and political system. Thank you very much for your attention, and just for 1 minute, I will show you some images from the Mineriada in the 1990s from the University Square.
Consider sfârșitul pieței universității o formă de război civil care s-a demonstrat a fi posibil și care rămâne în continuare o spaimă, aș spune, permanentă a existenței noastre.
Dr. Geboianu.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and also very interesting video clips. The last two, the video clip just looks very familiar. Yeah, it happened in Korea too before. So, so you will have. Yeah, so probably you will get the questions from our guest.
One of the main ideas of technology is that language is a social problem. According to this idea, social changes lead to linguistic changes.
Oh, we have some technical problems, so let us listen the fourth presentation now, okay? Sorry.
At the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. The Romanian society has undergone two major social changes. A transition from communism to capitalism after the democratic revolution in 1989, and a transition from the Balkan state to a part of Europe through EU membership in 2007. It is hard to decipher linguistic changes in a short period of time because language is too complex.
So, sorry, we have some technical problems, so we have to stop the fourth presentation. So in the meantime, just I would like to thank Dr. Geboianu. So Yeah, you will get some questions from our guests. So please wait. Yeah, until
Yes.
the end. And also, what time is it there now?
10:13 in Romania.
In AM.
In AM.
Okay,
Yes.
that's a relief. Okay. So are we ready? Okay, then let us listen to the last presentation. Today's final speaker is Dr. Taeyeon he's a senior researcher of Eastern European and Balkan Institute. He will present on lexical changes of Romanian language after 1989 revolution, focused on economic terminology. We will start his pre-recorded presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Taeyeon. It's an honor to present at the conference today. The topic I'm going to present is lexical changes of Romanian language after 1989 revolution, focused on economic terminology. One of the main ideas of Ferdinand de Saussure is that language is a social product. According to this idea, social changes lead to linguistic changes. This perspective was applied to Romanian society and language in this study, in which I attend to the language change at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. The Romanian society has undergone two major social changes: a transition from communism to capitalism after the democratic revolution in 1989, and a transition from the Balkan state to a part of Europe through EU membership in 2007. It is hard to decipher linguistic changes in a short period of time because language is too complex structure to be changed in a short period. So we must understand that there is a difference in levels of language flexibility according to social impact. The difference could be classified by linguistic categories. We cannot notice morphological or syntactical changes because those changes take very long time, usually longer than a lifetime. However, if we focus on lexical changes, we can discern a lot of changes. It is because vocabulary is the most labeled part of a language. We can observe easily the fact that language social changes lead to lexical changes. After pandemic COVID-19, we can observe that many new terms related to this social phenomenon are used around us. For example, we can see a word from English, caveat, which means someone who ignores the warnings regarding public health or safety. Also in Korean, we can see a word related to COVID-19, 확진자, which means a person who has gained weight quickly by not going out and staying home all the time because of concerns about COVID-19 pandemic. This is derived from the word 확진자, which means a person confirmed to have COVID and has similar pronunciations. In a study that classified the new terms that emerged between the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, by their meaning, economic terms were found to account for a high proportion of such words. This result is quite natural because economic systems are closely related with social changes. In this study, I focused on economic terminology that is substantially correlated with social changes. I examined the word formation, origin, and etymology of economic terms. The change in development of a particular field of expertise implies a conceptual change and progress in that area that must be expressed through a linguistic system optimized to express the conceptual structure. This linguistic system can be called a specialized language, and its constituent units are terms. Therefore, the terminology itself and the characteristics of the terminology that is created depend on the specialty area which has its own needs, history, and so on. For example, etymologically, in the medical field, there are many technical terms of Latin origin. In the field of linguistics, special terminology is used as a meta-language to be distinguished from general language. And in the field of chemistry, chemical terms are created to indicate new substances before the real substances are created. Each field has a different terminology system. The terminology in the economic field is not limited to use by expert groups, but tends to spread to the public as it is used in the interest of majority of people due to the nature of the field. As globalization becomes stronger, the spread of economic terms takes place worldwide, and English is at the center of this development. In addition, as the means of communication progresses, such as the internet, smartphone, and so on, the diffusion of economic terms is also quite rapid. In this study, which centers on linguistic changes that take place in response to social changes, I focused more on general economic terms rather than specialized economic terms, in which communication is limited to only few groups of experts. The period mentioned above, the end of the 20th century, is referring to the period after the 1989 revolution. The 1989 revolution served as a major turning point for Romanian society as well as for the linguistic changes in Romania. The social confusion caused by the revolutionary transition at that time also influenced lexical changes. In particular, many economic terms were rapidly created and widely communicated because they were needed in the process of urgent transition to capitalist system. Some of the new terms have been mixed with foreign words and were not able to be integrated into the Romanian linguistic system. The most problematic part was English terms, which were phonetically and morphologically different from Romanian. Via several media outlets, these terms tended to be used in their original form morphologically, but pronounced using Romanian phonetic rules, which are quite different from English rules. For example, the English term business was written in Romanian as it is written in English, business, but pronounced in business, according to Romanian phonetic rules. I looked at the terms listed in two different dictionaries, DPE and DEP, published after the revolution, to search for new economic terms. Since the two economic dictionaries were published after the revolution, it is highly probable that the new words that emerged after the revolution would have been listed. But this fact cannot be guaranteed because the two dictionaries are not classified as dictionaries of neologism. So these terms were then compared with the head words registered in the neologism dictionary called DN that was published in 1986. DN is the last published neologism dictionary before the revolution of 1989. The terms listed in DPE and DEP but not listed in DN were classified separately because they were considered to have emerged as new words after the revolution. In addition to those terms, if a new concept was added to an existing term, it was classified as new term. Most of the economic neologisms that emerged through this time were those referring to concepts that had not been used in the communist economy. For example, most of the terms were necessary in the securities market, finance, insurance, and free market economies. In the following chapter, new economic terms are explained according to the way such terms are formed. We can see many borrowings from French. These terms are integrated in Romanian linguistic system. The most common case in the internal creation of the Romanian vocabulary is the derivation through the suffix. This is due to the overwhelming number of suffixes in Romanian as compared to prefixes. In the case of economic terms, the majority of derivatives are also made through suffixes. However, many derived words actually have the form of noun suffix -le, which makes a long infinitive a type of noun, and most of these kinds of verb stems are French in origin. In addition, the roots of nouns with suffix in the form of itate have mostly French origins. In the examples below, the roots cyclic, liberaliza, resconta, stagna, and bandabil are French words. It is clear that the French language also had a significant impact on internal derivatives from this time. Many of the economic terms created as compounds are abbreviations, and there are many compound words with euro. Although euro was recognized as a pseudo-prefix, the word containing euro is classified as compound word because of its significant semantic independence. Here are the characteristics of economic terms after Revolution of 1989. The most common sources were French and English multiple etymology, and English. The French influence on Romanian gradually weakened, and the language power was in the process of being transferred to English. A changing language hegemony took a long time. The influence of English after the revolution was growing substantial, but what is characteristic is that After the 1989 revolution, French was preferred language rather than English when the original terms belong to both English and French. Because in terms of pronunciation and grammar, French words were easier to be accepted in Romanian language. Now we will see the lexical changes at the beginning of the 21st century. In the early 21st century, there were a lot of changes in vocabulary due to the readjustment of language policies. Act on the use of Romanian language in public places, relationships, and institutions was enacted. This law stipulates that Romanian words related in public understanding should be used in accordance with the academic norms, and the foreign words should be translated into Romanian. This law aimed to protect the Romanian language from foreign languages, especially English, that were being overused. In this regard, the Romanian Academy also presented some linguistic regulations for foreign words to be used in accordance with Romanian language norms. However, to control language through laws or institutions was neither natural nor easy. English words were spreading fast because there has been a preference to use English words. For example, frequently encountered English words, for words attached could be replaced by retransmite, attach, but English words were preferred. English words are not easy to be accepted in Romanian vocabulary system due to grammatical differences such as gender, number, case, etc., causing morphological confusions. The Romanian Academy published a special dictionary, DUM, which means Dictionary of Romanian Orthography, Orthography, and Morphology, in 2005. They amended the Romanian orthographic and orthographic rules to correct errors in foreign words used in Romanian. They aimed to make foreign words to be used in accordance with the original language norm in writing and pronunciation. The new orthographic regulations required the use of etymological forms in accordance with the original language when foreign words are used. However, in Romanian language, in which the rules of writing and speaking are mostly identical, there could be room for confusion in speaking foreign words. Therefore, the pronunciation of original foreign words were marked separately to present correct pronunciation. An analysis of new economic terms made in the early 21st century shows that there are 4 typical ways in which the new terms are created. Loan translations, borrowing foreign words, especially from English, derivatives by prefix, and compounds. Here are the examples of new economic terms at the beginning of the 21st century made by loan translation from English and French. We can see that there are more English words than French. These are economic terms borrowed from English and used as foreign words in Romanian language. These are the examples of new economic terms made by internal creations, derivatives, and compounds. Here is my conclusion. The Romanian language has undergone many changes since the 1989 revolution especially in the field of economics. At present, about 30 years after the revolution, we can observe a lot of lexical changes. Lexical changes can be broadly divided into external and internal methods based on their formation. Of course, there is a way in which both internal and external ways of extension are engaged. The loan translation. As shown in this study, at the end of the 20th century, immediately after the revolution in 1989, economic terms were most actively introduced from French. French influenced both internal and external vocabulary extensions. In the early part of the 21st century, the influence of English is particularly noticeable. However, unlike French, English belongs to a different language group from Romanian, and this amplifies difficulties in pronunciation and grammatical confusion. For this reason, it is more difficult for English words to be incorporated into Romanian language norms. Thank you for your listening.
We'll have questions for presenters, but unfortunately we have only 10 minutes left for this session. So let us have a quick question and answers. Is there anyone who, okay?
Hello, my name is Seungshin Lee. I'm a research assistant from EEBI. I have a question for Professor Matei Geboianu. First of all, thank you for your presentation. What I would like to ask you is that, as far as I know, like the transition in Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, it seems that the civil society and dissident movements were not very active during the transition in Romania. I wonder why in Romania the power of civil society wasn't that powerful and the dissident movement failed to play an active role in the transformation of the regime. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. If you can say it from the beginning, because I have a problem with my internet and I just heard the last part regarding the civil society, but I don't understand the first part. Sorry
okay.
for.
It's all right. Unlike the transition in Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, it seems that the civil society and dissident movements were not very active during the transition in Romania. So I wonder why in Romania the power of civil society wasn't that powerful and the dissident movement failed to play an active role in the transformation of the regime.
Okay, thank you. Now I understood. First of all, in Romania and in the last year of the communist regime, we didn't have an opposite, a dissident movement like Solidaritate in Poland. And after 1990, this civil society was at the beginning. Some historians they spoke that the Romanian Revolution ended in 1996 when the civil society and the opposition party won the election. In this period, 1990-1996, Ion Iliescu and his party and the other party that were from the Communist Party, because we have several parties that inherit the Communist Party in Romania. They try to minimize this civil society movement. And after 1992, when Ion Iliescu won his second term, he was elected for the second time as president of Romania, there was a lot of disappointment in the Romanian civil society, in the Romanian youth, and after 1990, after 1991, a lot of young people moved from Romania, left Romania because they saw Romania as a communist country. Even if we don't have Nicolae Ceausescu in front of this.
Thank you so much.
Okay. The next questions? Anyone? Okay.
I would like. Can I just?
Okay. Yeah.
I would-
Mr. Sprengel. Yes. Yes.
Yes. One moment. Yes, I would like just a little say something very good for the whole presentation. I'm very happy, and it's very interesting presentation to Dr. Tomasz Wierzbowski because it regards our country. The study is very interesting for me, especially in this time, which when we observe in Poland what happened now, the last few years. Thank you very much. It's very good. And I'm
Thanks
now,
for your questions. Yes.
yes, done now, and this is not question. Now I would like say appreciate for the whole presentation, also for Tomasz Wierzbowski. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind words. Thank you.
Okay. So there's another question then.
Yes, I was also interested in transformation in Poland, so I have a question to Dr. Tomasz Wierzbowski. First of all, thank you for your presentation. My name is Jae Che, and I'm a research intern from EEBI. You have suggested that economic, cultural, educational, and social factors as the cause of regime change. Then, which one do you think was the most important reason for regime change, and why do you think like that?
I mean, I believe it's intertwined. Those causes mix together and are complex, and it's very difficult to identify one. But as you may have seen in my presentation, I put a lot of effort to study economic development. And I was using these indicators of GDP per capita. So if you ask me personally from my study, I think this is economic development and well-being of people that make them struggle for democracy, that make them fight for the regime change. Because the more money people have, the more freedom they pursue. Let's look at North Korea, for example. Those people have difficulties to secure their food. They don't think about freedom of speech. They don't think about freedom of movement. It's not that they want to go for holiday in another country, right? Because they still struggle to secure their basic needs. But the moment they have enough food, the moment they have enough security, home security, health security, then they will start to think, okay, I want to go for vacation. Maybe I want to ski, because I'm on the level of development where I don't want to develop more. So among others, among all you mentioned, I would suggest to focus on economic development. But once again, I emphasize those causes are intertwined, mixed together, and somehow once this is more powerful, once that might be more powerful.
Oh, thank you for explaining. I totally understood.
Okay. Mr. Sprengel, Dr. Sprengel, I have a question for you. You explained mostly about the outbound migration of Polish people, but is there any inbound immigrant migration of Poles from abroad? For example, maybe Polish, the second or third generation in Canada or United States, they want to have some kind of a chance to do business in Poland, I think there will be reverse the immigrant or migration from another country. That's my first question. And second one, you explained the reason or factors to cause migration. Can you apply the same reason to the migration of a different nation from another country to Poland? For example, there are a lot of Ukrainian people migrate to Poland. So can we apply the same reason to them? That's all my questions.
Yes, okay. I would like to say, yeah, the same reason now in Poland is which we see people coming to our country also to improve their life. For example, from Ukrainian country, we have a lot of people coming to us also after the revolution and not stable situation Ukrainian. This is similar like in Poland before. And also it's very interesting. We have few books in Poland, but researcher done already. Of course, some Polish people now coming after 10 or 15 years coming to Poland. They build houses, they collect money from overseas, then bring to our Polish country, they improve life, and also they start new business. They're coming from Great Britain, a lot of people, they have money, they have experience how to do business open. And it's very interesting also this direction of study. Of course, we see the movement, many Polish people coming to Poland because our social life and wages all improve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Because of time limits, we cannot continue question and answer. So I have to wrap it up now. So through the presentation of this conference, we are able to learn many factors that cause the transformation and transition. In addition, we have learned that changes in Eastern European society have occurred not only in the political and economical sphere, but also in the every sphere of the society, and even in the language used in every life. Countries in Eastern Europe have had similar historical experience, but it is true that each has undergone unique changes. The Korean Peninsula is divided into North and South, and many people still dream unification in the future. If unification happened to be real, I think the experience of the Eastern European countries discussed today will be very good lesson. Through today's presentation and discussion, we seem to have received more questions than solutions. The answers and solutions to these questions will be revealed through our future research. Therefore, I can suggest to all of you to meet again in another conferences in the recent future. And thank you so much for your participation today. And I look forward to meeting you again after the coronavirus is over. We wish you good health, and we will conclude this conference here. Thank you so much. Thank
you.
Yep, thank you. 네, 고생하셨습니다.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.